Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ambassador, Erwin, my ears are burning, and this is unexpected and not the sort of thing I really enjoy. I feel a little bit embarrassed. But I do want to say, I don't want to sound as though it's just reciprocation. Canadian Jewry can be proud of having created one of the great leaders in the Jewish world. And that was the man who introduced me. I must say, it's been a great support for me to work with Erwin back in the early days in Soviet Jewry. Both of us were pioneers in this area. And Erwin was always a role model for Jewish activity everywhere in the world. And I do recollect that the only person in the World Jewish Congress that I was left with a sense of great admiration for, that he also typed from the World Jewish Congress around that time, was Erwin. And he has moved from that point to do such important field, to do such important work on the international Jewish scene, and he is continuing to do so. And all I want to say, Erwin, it's truly a privilege to have such a lovely introduction from you, and I hope that you continue with the extraordinary work that you are doing on behalf of the Jewish community and on behalf of Israel. And we are very privileged to have a few people like you in the world today. And I say a few people because the tragedy of the Jewish world today, both in Israel and in the diaspora, is an absence of leadership. We are an extraordinary people. The people of Israel are out of this world. What they have gone through and the strength and character that they've displayed under fire, under pressure, generation after generation, is something to be believed in. I want to say just one thing. This is not the time for me to speak, is it? I'll just speak for a couple of minutes and then the questions, what we arranged. Because we arranged that I was not going to give a formal address to respond to questions from you. But I want to say to you all one thing. We see a lot of ugly things coming out of Israel today. But I say to you, when you look at Israel in the context of history and the context of what has been achieved in Israel and has been achieved, and set aside all the sleazy politicians, this is still the greatest achievement, the miracle of the 20th century. And we Jews can feel and should continue to feel enormous pride that despite the leaders, this is a country which has achieved the unbelievable. And I always like to make the analogy and say, just go back 60 years ago. Think of those people in the camps. If they could have dreamt that Israel would be 1/10 of what it would have been today, they would have said, this is a dream that will never be realized. And I say to you that we are moving in a direction where we will overcome these problems, where we'll sweep out those that shouldn't be leaders and ultimately replace them by good Jews who represent the people. And when we do that, we will continue moving forward. We're going to go through a difficult period, but I think it's terribly important for Jews not to allow either a sense of euphoria or a sense of pessimism to dominate. We are still a strong superpower in the Middle East. We face enormous threats, but I would not feel confident about myself, my children, my grandchildren living in Israel if I did not have this inner conviction that we will and can overcome these problems, and will do so. And I want to say to you also, the issue of corruption is already the first step, because we have a bad system which makes good people sometimes become corrupt because the system does not allow for the public to reward or punish. And any system that does not enable the public to reward or punish the people it elects inevitably becomes corrupt. I'm saying to you that today in Israel you have the extraordinary situation where a president, a prime minister and cabinet ministers are treated much more toughly than the poor little man in the street. When you have a situation like that, you know that the days of corruption are over. And I can tell you, whoever will be the new leaders of Israel, The one thing all of them will be very, very careful about is to ensure that they're impeccable, and in the context of what has been, they will be an old goyim, they will be clean as a whistle. I have total confidence in that. We face great, well, I think I better stop there, Fred. You want to, no questions? I was not going to give a formal...
Yeah, we thought that we would open up at the end to questions.
Is that now?
And that's now.
Okay, good.
But not the end. We will continue. We thought that it would be nice to spend some time asking you some questions. And at the end of that, if you have a question for Ambassador Baker or the CEO Congo, you can have that question as well. Then we'll have dessert, or we also we'll have dessert.
Before you ask me a question, I want to make one observation though. I'm a pretty reasonable observer of the diaspora scene. There are not many more people around that know the diaspora as well as I do. And I say Canadian Jewry is blessed to be one of those communities that has a fledgling little body. I say it's a fledgling little body because you are a fledgling little body. But this fledgling little body has had an extraordinary impact, not just on Canada, but on the whole of the Jewish world. In terms of Hasbara, it symbolises this organisation here, this little group that Fred has built up with all his colleagues and friends. This group symbolises what's lacking in Jewish life, because if you look at the people that are involved, first of all, they are volunteers as well as professionals. Very few professionals, mainly volunteers, something which is unfortunately lacking in Jewish life. 30 or 40 years ago, the majority of people involved in public life were volunteers. Here, you are an exception. And part of that reflects the enthusiasm and the achievements that you've moved forward towards. The second part is that you've got young people, even here tonight. It's a pleasure to see young people and to know that you're working with young people, because as I've said again and again, if we lose our young people, we lose the future. There's no future for us. And the real tragedy that I see with anti-Semitism and the inclination on the part of many Jewish establishments, not only in Canada, the inclination of many Jewish establishments to somehow or other not rock the boat. It'll pass. Shh. Don't make a noise, because if you make a noise, all you do is you get a bad reaction. My friends, the result is that our children, if they grow up in an environment where they see their parents and they see their leaders not being willing to stand up for Jewish dignity, we lose them, and their children will be really down the tubes. And someone mentioned it before, I think it was the ambassador mentioned it before. Today we have a problem which is not a new problem. The problem of the anti-Jewish Jew. And he is playing an increasingly important role because our enemies are projecting him in the forefront. It's not new. It goes back to the days of Hellenism. It goes back to the Middle Ages, when you had the worst anti-Semites were some of the converts. It goes back more recently to communists. And if the Jewish communists were the worst people that we had to deal with in the battle for Soviet Jewry. They were the ones that were clapping and applauding when Stalin was executing Jews. Today we have the same sort of people now expressing themselves in terms of anti-Israel. The difference and the danger of today is that the leadership today, somehow or other, in this pluralistic world, somehow feels that they've got to be given an opportunity instead of being marginalised and thrown out of the Jewish community as the communists and as the other Jews who turned on the Jewish people were in the past. That's the danger, because if it becomes a choice to be pro-Israel or anti-Israel within the framework of the Jewish community and our debates about Israel in the Jewish community, och and weh for our future. That's where the bottom line is, and that's where leadership comes in. And those leaders who try to keep quiet and feel that somehow or other we're going to overcome issues by keeping quiet are doing a terrible thing to the Jewish people. I make analogies. This was expressed in the most awful manner, and I don't like to make the analogy, but I wrote about it recently. During the war, American Jews were under great pressure. There was a lot of anti-Semitism. But when the Jews in Europe were burning, and when they were told to keep quiet by the leaders of the country, they kept quiet. And that to me still symbolises one of the blackest marks on Jewish leadership in the 20th century. We don't want to have a situation where in the years to come we'll be looking at Jewish leaders in various parts of the world and saying, by remaining silent and by standing on the sidelines and not being prepared to stand up and fight and show dignity, you also paved the way for an environment where Israel becomes a pariah in the world. Now,